Welcome, everybody. After that wonderful introduction by Auntie Joy, I'd like to add my acknowledgement to the traditional owners of the land on which we stand and pay respects to elders past, present and future. My name's Sean Butler. I'm here as the facilitator today with our wonderful panel who you'll get to meet and hear from soon. Today is the second seminar in the series on the framework for improving student outcomes. It's our Twilight series. It's an opportunity to delve into key aspects of FISO and build on work that's happened across our schools and systems over the last 18 months. We're here today hosted by the Bastow Institute of Educational Leadership and the Improvement and Accountability branch of the Performance Division of the Regional Services Group. And in case we don't get the opportunity to thank all of the people who've been involved in the production of today at the end, I'd like to thank them all now, from our IT and AV assistants at the top through to the people from the Department of Education and Bastow who've helped organise everything today. So thank you to all of them. I'm here today wearing a number of hats. One of those hats is as the Acting Director of Implementation in Regional Services Group. Another hat is as a researcher into system leadership. With both of those hats on, I'm really interested in today's presentations around the connection between policy and practice, and the ways we can really see a connection between good policy and great policy and the actual practice that happens on the ground in schools. And we can say that FISO is a great example of policy because what it does is it takes us to the instructional core. It takes us to what teachers are doing every day, what students are doing every day, and how those two groups are interacting around a task. And when a policy is able to connect to that instructional core, we can say it's a really great policy. But having a great policy, I hope it goes without saying, is not enough. What we need is really great practice. And what we've got here today is a panel of practitioners who can talk to us about the way they're taking policies and frameworks and ideas from around the world and turning them into really high quality practice in their classrooms so that the experience and the outcomes of children every day, children and young people, are improved and enhanced. The business that I'm sort of overseeing today is our panel discussion, and I'll move to introducing the panel in a moment. But what I'm going to do first is discuss the context of the learning and the objectives that sit behind the new pedagogies for deep learning approach that's being piloted and experimented with our schools that are here to discuss today. One of the main things that those schools and the NPDL project is looking at is how we can mobilise and foster new pedagogies for deep learning with our students. The NPDL is a collaboration across 7 countries: Australia, Canada, Finland, Netherlands, New Zealand, Uruguay and the US. And there are 100 schools participating in Australia from Queensland, Victoria and Tasmania, and 80 of those schools are in Victoria and across all of our regions. Today's expert panel has a range of experts, obviously. One of those is Lynn, the Director of Teaching and Learning branch within the Department of Education and Training in Victoria. Teresa Stone, who's the principal of Derrimut Primary School. Michael Phillips, who's known to many of us here, principal of Ringwood Secondary College. Nicole Barnes and Alex Box, who are the NPDL leaders at Rangeview Primary School. Together, from our expert panel, we'll hear about 3 core things that I hope we can take away from today. We'll hear about deepening learning, we'll hear about student agency, and we'll hear about enabling collaboration. I'm particularly keen on hearing about how we can collaborate between schools, between our systems and schools, and internationally to enhance our students' experience. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Lynn. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to our people beaming in from far away. New Pedagogies, as Sean said, is 7 countries, and I'm very privileged to be the cluster lead for Australia for this initiative. And it really is about how can we look at new pedagogies and deepen learning. And it's been quite challenging, and it is, the schools that we're working with are really exploring learning and teaching excellence. What's it all about? It's about identifying a framework of deep learning competencies, and they are worded in your handout. I have to stand closer to the microphone, sorry. In the handout on the front, affectionately called in NPDL the 6 Cs, and they're They form the framework to actually build deep learning competencies. We also have a range of new measures and tools that we're reviewing, practicing using, and we also have learning progressions against each of those 6 Cs. The work is to actually test these tools and measures to see if they can be systematised at all. We're also identifying and sharing new models of pedagogical practice. We're looking at the precise use of digital technology to both accelerate and improve and add value to learning. And the schools are forming communities of practice locally and globally to influence system change. And it's really all about building practice excellence. The tools and processes to shift practice have been designed by the global team, and they include tools around learning design, where we have protocols and rubrics for teachers to review what they have designed for kids post-implementation, and also school conditions to actually see from a leadership perspective whether or not the conditions for deep learning are in place to support staff. The work is actually underpinned by Michael Fullan as the leader of the whole initiative, and his book Coherence is one that may be of use to schools, especially if you're looking from a network perspective of another layer that you can bring to the FISO framework. And that layer is about focusing direction, cultivating collaborative cultures, deepening learning, and securing accountability. For us, the heart of it is that it's a bolt-in program, not a bolt-on. All of the schools have a different story to tell because they are meshing the tools and the strategies in with their existing practice of how they can keep on an improvement journey. And it really is about curriculum, pedagogy, assessment and reporting. So it's about what's powerful to learn, what's powerful learning and what promotes it, and how will we know what learning has occurred, what has the impact been. And there's an engine that drives this that Teresa will go through with you around assessing, designing, implementing and measuring that drives that learning design. Another one of your handouts is something from Michael Fullan's paper, A Rich Theme, that he and Maria Langworthy gave. And it talks about effective new pedagogical strategies, like students and teachers as co-learners, looking at deep learning tasks, ensuring that there are clear learning goals, giving kids choice and control over their learning, the importance of feedback. And these strategies actually, when you go through the FISO framework, align with the high impact strategies. Our schools have used this particular framework to actually get their staff to consider what good pedagogical practices are and what they're not. The lens that we look at new pedagogies from has 5 key points, and they are: what are the pedagogical practices that are worth having? And that hasn't meant necessarily all new ones. Sometimes it's reviewing what's working and adding new tool sets to it. What are the learning partnerships that we need to have? Students and teachers, students and students, the school and families. And what are the industry partnerships or community partnerships that can add value to learning at the school? How do we leverage digital technologies to add value to learning? What are the learning environments? Where does learning happen? And when does it happen? And most importantly, how do we actually design learning so that it's deep? How do teachers bring in the curriculum frameworks from VCAA as a driver and a focus, and then within their learning design activities and experiences for kids so they have opportunities to develop those 6 Cs: collaboration, critical thinking, creativity, citizenship, communication and character. And then how do they assess to ensure the impact? I'm going to show you a clip that will take you into 5 schools that aren't here tonight. And through that, as you're watching that clip, have a look and see whether the points down the side, which are the high impact strategies mentioned in FISO, you think may be happening in that school. You may not actually see it in the clip, but you might get a sense that that is the nature of the work.
Discovery Learning at Woolsthorpe is a learning program that's driven by the students' interests. The kids use the learning process to help them work their way through discovery learning.
The first bit of the apple is what you're going to learn about. The second bit is I want to know more about. And then the third bit is what am I going to do my presentation on and how am I going to present it to the world.
They're really interested. They direct it. And I really welcome that new learning, that taking risk and that really pushing the boundaries.
We were really focused on providing our students with some hands-on experimental play learning. The science curriculum lended itself really nicely to that. We chose light and circuitry.
My project is a battery-powered boat. The blades are curved in a specific way so it moves forward.
Changing the rhetoric around what students are capable of. It's almost just asking why. Why can't they do that?
Our leadership team kept asking the question whether or not students at this school are just compliant or are they truly engaged. And I thought, what could I change to truly engage them? And then I started questioning, is my teaching truly student-centred?
The best part of our radio project was probably the planning day, because we all got to contribute ideas on these pieces of paper and what we wanted to be assessed on. Collaboration, communication and creativity were the most important to this project because we used them whether we were just writing the scripts or interviewing the celebrities.
I won't ever plan something in isolation as a teacher again. I've seen firsthand how important it is to put the students' ideas and wants first.
We relaxed the rules on the volume within the library. We didn't want the kids to come in here and go, shh, you've got to be quiet, you've got to do this, you've got to do that. It became a place where the rules were just taking over and not making it a place where they wanted to be.
Well, it's just like a space where people can interact, learn new things and do different things that they haven't done before.
To have this program work, we needed that space for the discovery learning to take place. Therefore, we needed to rearrange our school, we needed to knock out some walls. We decided we don't need tables and chairs for every student. It's that flexible use of the learning spaces.
There's a big hub in the middle and then you have 4 learning studios. The whole school, basically, 92 students, are all in that one space learning together and learning from each other.
We explored the notions of interdependence through the different books that we had. With Hunger Games, we ended up using our 3D printer and they made a model of the district and then they had their own Pan Am to take home.
This is our project and basically you have to click the light of the buzzer. And this project is all about the coding and circuitry side of things. To make the game work, you need to code it properly.
So when we finished our interview with whichever celebrity we were doing, we would upload it to SoundCloud and then we would come onto Twitter and we would thank them for coming in.
They could see people retweeting us on Twitter, and I think because it created such a buzz as well, the sense of community within my classroom. They had such a high level of trust in each other, respect, encouragement.
We've taken 2 Year 7 classes out. They've gone out with a senior Curie elder from this particular area. He's taken them to all the historical and cultural sites in the areas. The kids have taken mobile devices with them. They've recorded him or taken pictures of the places they've been to, and they've come back and made what's called a location-based game. So that's a very powerful form of cultural mapping.
Deep learning for me is a massive spider's web, because what I see in that is a myriad of perspectives that are colouring your decision making, and it comes from a multitude of different experiences.
On the coloured sheet down the bottom there's a fuse link, and we've put this video and we've put a range of other videos there that are about 3 minutes long that you may wish, if it's appropriate, to use with your staff just for discussion purposes. And a big shout out to Brow Secondary College who are beaming in, who starred on the video. There's some key things that we're learning from this initiative, and one is that it really is about deepening learning. John Hattie is one of our advisors to the work, and he actually challenges us that it's really important that teachers scaffold from surface to deep learning, and that's not easy. They have to know the curriculum, they have to assess well, they have to assess individual kids, and they have to be questioning carefully. And he's talking to us about the need to ensure the balance between surface and deep learning. And we've been working with Pam Hook from New Zealand on her solo methodology as well. And John Hattie calls it the Goldilocks principle, the principle of challenge for students when it's not too hard and not too easy, but providing maximum opportunities for kids to revisit concepts so they understand them, so that they get to a point where they can actually apply them in real life. The other key point is about student agency, and Seymour Papert recently passed away, and he was a leader in the thinking around student agency. And what we're seeing is it's kids taking an active role in the co-development of learning tasks, like those kids from Canterbury. And the best feedback I reckon they've ever had about their work was when Hamish and Andy gave them feedback about their radio station. So that will remain with them as a memory from primary school. And it's about kids assessing the results. It's more than participation, it's actually engaging kids in the real decision making and their willingness to work together. The other key wonderment that's come out of it is the power of enabling collaborative expertise between teachers within a school and teachers beyond schools. The teachers between schools are actually moderating the learning designs from their school to ensure and give feedback whether it really has deepened the learning.
Thank you very much, Lynn. It's really wonderful as a system that we have people like Lynn who are so deeply expert in the work, who can really enrich our discussion and dialogue as a system, but also connect with our schools really, really closely. And in that video, such a powerful moment to see a teacher say that it's through the work that he's been doing in this project, he's seen what students are capable of. And what a powerful outcome for that teacher. And another thing that stood out for me was the young boy who said this was an opportunity for him to use his creativity to solve problems. That's a really powerful outcome for that young man. So I'm going to hand over to our next presenter from Derrimut Primary School, and I'll let you introduce yourself.
Thank you. Good evening. My name's Teresa, and I'm from Derrimut Primary School, which is a large primary school out in the western suburbs of Melbourne. Derrimut Primary School prides itself on being a place to grow and thrive. And one of the startups for us around this work with NPDL and the FISO initiatives was about practice excellence and developing rigorous learning for all. And one of the things that we found around our design in inquiry was that we designed rigorous work, but the enactment wasn't as rigorous. So by the time it got to the classroom, the rigour and the cognitive load was on the teacher. They'd sucked all the life out of the learning, is what I'm trying to say. But what what we wanted to do was value the principle around who drives this learning, who owns it, and developing feedback for both teachers and students that wasn't authority driven, that there was an intrinsic way of being co-drivers in finding out what they know and what progress looked like. NPDL gave us a language and tools to examine our structures and strategies, and to make sure that we're engaging in the work in a way that aligned with our philosophy of socially constructed learning. So as a research school, where all learners, parents, students and teachers, leaders were researchers, we needed to be data literate, build capacity in foundation and deep learning, and build the pedagogical content structures, strategies and practices. A lot of the time our teachers say, yes, that's fine, it sounds fantastic, but what does that look like when it's working really well in my space with my kids? What will the kids look like? How will parents see their child progressing? And we needed to strengthen the design and enactment, and that's where NPDL really supported us and worked with us to be a community that looks outwards in partnerships and to strengthen our learning. A lot of schools tackled NPDL in teacher and classroom. We decided, because we had a strong inquiry base, that we would tackle this as a whole school focus. A little bit ambitious at the start, but we're nearly there. So what we looked at, if we were going to be really truly student-centred and connected to teacher professional learning, we needed to know what it would look like for children. So in our strategic plan, it's a little bit unclear there, but it needed to be one page and it needed to be accessible for everybody in our school. So the professional learning framework is about learning powerfully, assessing, co-assessing and designing for assessment. And all the white stripes down there are what the teachers will look like when they are differentiating, building agreed and viable curriculum, that sort of thing. And the orange section is what children will look like. So matching very closely what we want, our aspirations for our children, and what we need to do, what our work is in getting us there. We had 4 tools, and Lynn mentioned them before, that really helped us connect vertically, not in a hierarchical way, but in a collaborative way to drive this work. And one of the ways was the collaborative inquiry cycle. So in terms of, it puts our work, not just in design, but in the context of the school, of the learners, whether they're teachers, parents or students. So when we assess what are the collective aspirations for our kids and our teachers and our community, where are we now? What data do we have? And when we started to ask that question, we only had system data. We weren't using children's work, I know this sounds silly, but we weren't using children's work as evidence and sharing that with them and them being able to use that evidence of progress. So at the leadership level, what did our teachers and our school need? What were the programming needs? At the PLT level, so teachers leading professional learning teams, they use this to focus and assess, design for learning, implement the learning, and then measure and reflect the change. So keeping on going around in that cycle. Just because we did one thing does not mean we're stuck there. We need to look at the new learning in light of evidence. So that evidence-based approach for us became our catch cry. It's not data, it's not assessment. What evidence? Where do you place yourself? What is it about our school or the work that the kids are doing that makes us assume that this might be happening? What else could be happening here? It really led our conversations. And instead of skimming along the top of new innovation and covering the curriculum, it allowed us to deepen, slow down, and as we slowed down and understood our context and our learners flew. The other tools that really helped us in connecting to deep learning, because you have to pay attention to foundational learning as well as deep learning, and that was a question for us. That real pressure to do, how do we keep teaching reading for those children that need that foundational piece, and then how do we connect it to deep learning about the comprehension? How do we do that in real context that means something to these children that they could drive? So there was 2 ways that we deepened our learning. We had the 6 C's, so we looked at collaboration and character for a start. What were our dispositions? Were we not getting anywhere because our kids didn't feel confident or we didn't feel confident? We weren't taking risks, we weren't persisting? Or did we not connect out to learning partnerships? Were we not touching base with experts, other schools, each other, our parents? So the conversation for the quadrant there is, if we're stuck anywhere in our learning and we don't see it deepening, we use this as a quick conversation to be able to say, let's just look at, have we looked at the way of leveraging digital? My one example of that is a 3-4 group They were looking at sustainability, and they were stuck finding things in our yard. You know, when you go for that safari hunt and you're trying to find bugs, and there's always none there because they know you're coming. So we did find snails, and the teachers were kind of a little bit oh, yuck, snails, we're not going to get anywhere with that. Anyway, long story short, they had a wonderful time. They did lots of biological diagrams, and then they got stuck. And what they realised by using that 10-minute conversation, they had the right pedagogies. They needed to connect with an expert about what, in the kitchen garden, and as one of our gardeners, about how that was in our environment, and then how do we leverage digital. And one of the ways that they wanted to communicate all of their amazing learning was QR codes. So they put all of their diagrams digitally and used QR codes, and now there's a fence safari along our school that both the community can access and the other children can access. So just as a little way of deepening. The second tool that was really important for us across the whole school, including for our teachers and for our students, was the solo taxonomy. And it's from Pam Hook, and this was about deepening the conceptual knowledge and the thinking skills. So one of the things that we couldn't quite get to as a school was, how do we do this as assessment as learning? We couldn't quite get our heads around or our context around working with children in assessment. And this tool actually helped us with this. We did it in two ways. The first way was teacher framed. So what would be all of the Vic Curric, what's your curriculum, what would be scientist knowledge, what's the background that we needed to read, and placing it along the solo so teachers could make connections for what they could look out for when children were using provocations to show what they knew, or they're finding out, sorting out. And then the teachers used it as ways of children self-assessing with evidence. So the children came to their work and the solo, and were able to put their name where they started with evidence. So they'd bring their evidence up in a small group, a conference, or as a whole class, and ask and tell and talk about what they could show. They also combined it with the Creativity C to look for criteria about asking good questions. So all of a sudden we had ways of children being able to share a language, a teacher language. Don't guess what's in the teacher's head. We had this shared language to go, what is the deep thinking and the deep thinking skills and the way that we want to be. We want to ask good questions. We want to be creative in the way that we think about this. We want to persist. We want to collaborate. So again, as we go through this work, what we're finding, our designs are now conceptually based, not content based. And they're using multiple solos to build up a bigger picture, so that we're coming from a multidisciplinary base around chemistry, physics, around social, political, cultural reasons for why we're doing this work. They're using all different ways to track their learning, and on the left there is the teachers' solo so that they can track children, and on the right there is the children's continuous solos around how they've progressed with their work. When we talk to parents now, we have the evidence and the solos that show growth and progress about how deep their learning is. When our teams came back to re-strengthen their designs and look at the Vic curriculum, our grade 1-2 students were hitting outcomes at level 4 and level 7 with evidence. So not just a good guess, yes, that looks really great, I think they've got that, but we had real evidence that our kids were thinking very deeply in a scientific way. I think, and this is also just a whole class way about students being able to plot where they are as a whole class. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Teresa.
Thank you.
I had the very great good fortune of having a conversation last week with Teresa, We spoke for about half an hour about her experience of opening Derrimut Primary School 6 or 7 years ago. 7 years ago. It was a good half-hour conversation about the experience of that 6-month period where she was on her own creating a new school. So it's really wonderful to be here a week later and hearing about where you've actually arrived 7 years later. So thank you very much for that. The thing that really stood out for me there was that Teresa started speaking about the disconnect that she observed between excellent design and the actual delivery in the classroom, and then the power of using moderation and teacher collaboration to really arrive at deep learning for students. So I'm going to hand over now to our next presenters, Nicole Barnes and Alex Box. They're the NPDL leaders from Rangeview Primary School. Thanks.
Thank you. We've got a short introductory video that we'd like to show you first. Before we do, I suppose we're just ordinary teachers in our school. We're not in the principal class or anything. We're just ordinary teachers. We're leading, I suppose, NPDL from the bottom up. And this project was to develop citizenship within our students across the school, but also to encourage our teachers to step in and to develop a different way of teaching through challenge-based learning and to have a better understanding of what the NPDL is all about. Yep.
Today we're excited about just one day. Globally, there are 58 million children who do not have access to basic primary school education. This is not acceptable. So we are raising money for International Needs Australia so children living in poverty can go to school.
Just One Day has been a really great opportunity for our students to learn to live in someone else's shoes. We wanted our students to be 21st century learners and to be global citizens. And that meant that they would have to understand global, worldwide problems. And developing countries and global poverty is a global problem.
So on the Just One Day school day that we had, the children ate simply from just rice to a potato soup. We turned off electricity, we didn't use any electronic devices, we were digital technology free for a day. We used water thoughtfully. We had students bring in some laundry and they needed to be thoughtful with water as they did it.
My mum used to always say, be grateful for what you have because some others don't have what you have, and I used to never really think about that, but now that I've learnt about Just One Day, I have really noticed that I really should be grateful and respectful.
Well, the Just One Day program provided us with a whole lot of resources around global poverty that have been designed specifically for primary age students. We've been trying to integrate learning areas English and maths and come up with more authentic, meaningful projects, but with Just One Day everything happened so easily that we didn't even really have to think very hard. I felt like I was more on a learning journey with the children and that they were driving the learning more because they were so interested and engaged, and because they felt so empowered that they could make a difference. The engagement of the topic and the power that they felt, the empowerment that they felt to make a difference, really drove the learning, which for me, that's what I've been looking for many years, is for students to be driving the learning, and this unit's just kind of hit the nail on the head for me.
The connection between International Needs Australia and the passion from our staff and what it facilitated in their teaching. It was wonderful to see how passionate they did become about it, and I think that that was quite remarkable, and for many of them it's changed their lives, as in then changing the lives, I believe, of many of our students.
When we first started learning about Just One Day, I didn't know much about it and I thought they were living a simple life like us, but when I actually discovered all these things, it really struck me that it's not a simple life over there.
They do have those aha moments when they realise how difficult life is, or how they realise that not all girls get an education, or they realise that if they only had clean water, perhaps their lives would be different. Simple things that we take for granted.
And the fundraising that we were going to make a difference was going to be that kind of celebration of our learning. You know, look at this, we've done all this learning and look, we've made a difference, and we know where that money's going to go because we've studied and we know the difference that it's going to make.
So as an NPDL school, we have slowly been introducing the 21st century skills being collaboration, communication, character, critical thinking, creativity and citizenship. But this citizenship, this was one thing that we were sort of stumbling across at the start of the year, thinking how can we develop citizenship amongst our children? We wanted our students to solve ambiguous problems, to think like global citizens and consider global issues. But how could we do this from foundation to grade 6? How you know, it was such a big issue for us. We really didn't know where to get started. And then at the time we were discussing this and brainstorming ideas, this pack came along from International Needs, the Just One Day pack with ideas and resources. And it really ticked all the boxes for us. There was a global issue being global poverty. It allowed the opportunity for our students to develop empathy, to live a day in the life of someone else's shoes, to see and hear stories from children who are living in poverty every day. It fostered the ability for them to solve a problem. And then they had the challenge for them was, what can we do for those people who are living in poverty? And it suited children from foundation to 6. It came with resources, it came with ideas, and it came with the ability for us to work from there.
So as a whole school, the markers across the whole school were that all the children participated in hands-on workshops run by International Needs Australia. They were called the Just Like Me, and on that day they had a classroom component where they were doing some learning and thinking about need, you know, things that children need, and then they spent some time outside living a shortened day in the life. And so that was the first whole school experience. And then we continued out the learning in our classrooms. A few weeks later, we had a whole school Just One Day, the day where families were also encouraged to live simply. You know, what you saw in the video, that was the Just One Day that our whole school experienced at school. And then a few weeks later, or towards the end of term, we had a whole school celebration. It was a big assembly event, and you know, you couldn't move in the hall. I think it was the biggest turnout we've ever had. The families were so involved in this. We had a lot of feedback about how excited they were that their kids were engaged in something so real and relevant to their lives. So that's at a whole school level what was happening. At a level, and Nicole and I both teach grade 4, so we've been working together to try and reimagine the way that we approach the curriculum. We've really been looking at how to bring different learning areas together, and where we became students of Lane Clark last year, being able to attend some of her PD, and have been trialling a lot of her processes, from her planning approach to the way that she teaches her children explicitly to find relevance in their learning. The immersion phase, which is one of her terms to start the learning journey, the children are learning so much about the issue, and then we started to look at, with the children, co-planning what meaningful projects can we create together.
Once the workshops were over and the big fundraising day was finished, we didn't want the learning to end. We wanted to keep going. They were getting so much out of it. We had so much positive feedback from the parents, and the children were really engaged in this. So we started to look at the curriculum, and we started to think about what could we bring in, what could we pull from all areas of the curriculum, from the core curriculum, to foster those 21st century skills. And whilst our focus was on global citizenship, we wanted students to develop and foster all of the other 21st century skills as well. So we tried to think of some projects that we would do, and one of the things that impacted upon the kids was the knowledge that more people die in developing countries through extreme weather and natural disasters than in developed countries. And we started to really brainstorm this and think about why, and that was the big challenge for them, the big so what of their learning is, why does this happen? Why do people die in developing nations after extreme weather, and why don't we die here in Australia? So this unit of work was developed from that, about natural disasters. So at the same time we're fostering, and we at a school we really do have to but take note of what curriculum we're covering. So we made sure we were ticking all the boxes there, but we really made it suit our needs. Students were given task sheets to work through. They worked collaboratively with their partners. They worked at their own pace, and they were always encouraged to reflect on their learning and create new learning goals. Students started to develop shelter boxes. You can see that little green box there. So they, after developing understanding for natural disasters and extreme weather, they started to think about what we have here in Australia if natural disasters affect us, and what we could possibly give to those children or families in need. And they made shelter boxes, and they created little needs and wants to help families out, and they had to decide what was important for those families. So that was the big idea for them, the big question: what contributes to global poverty? And then they realised that we can't change the weather, but we can give aid to those in need, and that whole project was on that. We also like to for the digital curriculum, we've been doing a lot on coding, and whilst we've been learning about coding through making games and having a lot of fun in that way, we really wanted it to be a deep learning experience for children. And coding is not all about games. So in the real world, it's so much more. It's a way of demonstrating knowledge and sharing information. So we wanted the children to see that coding was transferable across all curriculum areas. So whilst we sit and we play hopscotch and we create games, we wanted them to share their knowledge through coding. And so they had to develop codes to show how tsunamis affect countries, and they had to create a code to show how earthquakes affect. And that was a big, powerful learning experience for them. And then we were able to share those on YouTube and through, everyone else was able to share. It also developed the opportunity for kids who weren't very good at coding to get help from others. And although they might have had a great science knowledge, they may not have been so great at coding. So children started to, make up groups according to who had the science knowledge and who had the coding knowledge. This was just a way that we've been, I suppose, learning how to plan ourselves for this. We're trying to cover, on the very left, trying to cover the curriculum to show what we're covering, but also we're trying to show how it spreads across the 21st century skills. Just like, in a maths lesson, we don't just learn maths. We've got reading, writing, we've got science. Some of the skills aren't taught in isolation, and they're fostered throughout. So this was, for us, I suppose, is a learning experience for us to develop a way of planning this, but it's also was to try and share this with the other staff at our school so they can see that when we do a task, how just by tweaking a task, we can cover all of those skills. And it might just be through encouraging children to write reflections or to give each other feedback. But it was really trying to hone in on those different 21st century skills.
And I guess alongside this planning document, we have our scope and sequence for English and maths and the digital technologies. And a strategy that we took away from Lane Clark is just to have it and look at how pieces fit into what you're doing naturally, and it does. And just kind of tick off as you're going, or highlight, yep, we're covering this now through here. So this document's been really helpful to really try and put more of a focus on the 6 Cs, because our staff are pretty savvy about English and maths. We know what's in there and what needs to be covered, and bringing the focus here was really helpful.
As a part of assessment, we've been introducing rubrics into our classroom. These are all created with the students. So we start off, we talk about what sort of things as teachers are we looking for, what sort of skills are we looking for, and what sort of things as students do you want to try and develop. So this is, I suppose, covering or the skill of character. The students are creating learning goals, they're understanding what to learn next, and through these rubrics, they're challenging themselves. We don't develop the rubrics to start off with. We do some work and then we start developing the rubrics a week or two into it. So they have knowledge of the task and they start to realise what they need to be developing themselves. I find them really powerful. For instance, we started making the 3D shapes, and all the children in my grade decided to go straight for a cube or a rectangle or a prism. And there were two girls in particular that after making this rubric, they decided they didn't want a 2-star shape. They wanted to make a 3-star shape. So they went and investigated how to make an octagonal prism. So it's it challenges students to aim a little bit higher, and once they see what they've chosen as the learning goals, they challenge themselves and they think, well, I don't really want that, I want to get to this point, and then they work out how they're going to get there.
Well, there's maths everywhere, and in this topic, it was actually during the immersion phase that we had this mini project going. It was to create an infographic based on the data in this book, If the World Were a Village. And it was a really challenging task, and it was really great to have a hands-on activity. And for me, a couple of students stood out. They're not very good with numbers and maths and really understanding percentages, and needed a bit of help there, but they really stood out at trying to solve the problem of how to actually create a pie graph with a 100 centimetre circumference, for example. The problem solving that came about, and to be able to navigate GraphMaker and figure out how it worked. It wasn't necessarily the most academic children in the class, so it was really good to have lots of different strengths working at a challenging task, and we were covering, graphing, presenting data along the way. Another project was generated through student co-planning, was to create storybooks for children in Uganda, and this was sparked by our Skype connection to a school in Uganda, Ginger Christian College, which had been set up by a couple of people in our local community, and that's how we made contact with them. Our students discovered that the students are working really, they love school, they don't look forward to the holidays because they love the opportunity to come to school. They get well fed at school, and that they're working really hard to learn English. And so through questioning, teacher questioning, what can we do, what have we found out, what could we do next with this knowledge, the students generated the idea of actually creating some storybooks to help them practice and learn their English. So that's a project which they've been working really hard on. They had an authentic audience, an authentic purpose, and the bar was really set high because we wanted to do a really good job. We didn't want to leave any mistakes in there that might affect their English learning. So that's been a really great project that's covered a lot of our English this term. The market was a collaborative project, also sparked through student co-planning. We just asked the question, what can we do? We're doing this, we're doing that. Is there anything else that we want to do? And we told the students that we'd support an event if they wanted to hold one. And they did. Where they brainstormed different options and went through a critical thinking process of, what would be the most viable option, what could be opened up to our whole school community, and in the end it was a market fundraiser, and it was really great. The children who loved arts and crafts were in their element, and others were creating ideas for little food stalls, and all sorts of things were going on. And on the day, family came along, the whole school came along with their $1 and $2 coins and bought something, and it really was a fantastic collaborative experience, because in the lead up to the day, in the weeks and weeks in the leading up, children were working hard at home because they were so motivated to make enough products to sell, and they needed to be organised, they needed to be resilient when their ideas were perhaps, critiqued for, I don't think people would pay $2 for that and all that sort of stuff. So it really was a great project to have alongside the other learning. And the children ended up raising around $700 for the cause, and they decided to send that over to Ginger Christian College, where they'd made that connection through the Skype call. We consulted with them and the school over there about what they would most need, and then our students made the final decision and purchased an iPad, which the school, that was sort of what they would really like, to have an iPad to be able to start bringing some sort of technology into their school and supporting equipment. So just another example of how this Just One Day unit has sort of allowed us to co-plan with the students and create some really exciting experiences for them. So
we were really proud of this unit. I think for us as teachers, it was the first time we've ever done anything like this as a whole school. And for our students, it really developed their global citizenship. It developed their ability to problem solve and to understand how solving one problem could in turn possibly solve another problem. They began to realise that just access to clean water, having that fresh water, could possibly mean that it would not only solve the health problems of children living in poverty, living in developing nations, but it would allow mothers to go to work, and it would allow mothers to go to work and earn money for their family. They realised that it allowed particularly girls to go to school, because girls weren't able to go to school because it was their job to collect water for their family. And then, of course, they would grow up and they wouldn't have the ability to get a job because they weren't educated. So they began to realise that just having water could solve so many problems for the future. And as citizens of a technically developed world, this is a big problem. There is a great big divide between our nations. We've got technology to do everything that we possibly need to do, and they don't have access to water. So our students will be the future problem solvers. So having this knowledge and having this empathy at a young age, I think, is going to make a big difference in their lives for their future.
Yeah. So just, I guess, finish by saying if you haven't done a unit on global poverty, really Just One Day, they really have fantastic media and lots of great ideas. They've got well-equipped websites. If it's something that you consider, we really recommend it.
We've got packs if you're interested.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks very much, Nicole and Alex. Just to raise one problem with the presentation, which began with saying ordinary teachers. There's no such thing, and I think that was a really great example of there being no such thing as ordinary teachers. As a system, we really rely on our teachers to be the key agents of any change and improvement we want to experience for our children and our learners across the system. It was great again also to see the voice of young people on the video. One young girl in particular who said that she'd learnt how to be grateful. And we know that gratitude is one of those character traits that has a real impact in later life on children and young people's mental health, and the ancillary benefits that come from empowering students, engaging them really, really well and deeply in curriculum. I think we all understand the importance of that. Handing over from our first group of leaders who've presented to another leader, I think I mentioned that one of my other hats is as one of the principal class at Northcote High School. In that capacity, I've come across Michael a number of times in his leadership of Ringwood Secondary College. So I'll hand over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, and good evening, everyone. I think I've been hearing from the global teacher warriors this afternoon, so never sell yourself short, because you do make a huge impact to the young people that you're working with on a day-to-day basis. So I'm probably going to take the journey back a little bit to where Lynn started this afternoon, and to talk a little bit about our context and some of the big pieces of work that we're engaged in around new pedagogies for deep learning. And in starting that, I think we should... going back the other way. That's better. Okay, so if we go back to this whole notion of the education state, and obviously FISO comes in nicely underneath that, but for us it's really about the focus on the whole child. That young person that is going to leave my school at the end of year 12 hopefully as a confident and capable young person, being able to take their place in the wider world and being able to make some sort of success of it, whatever that might be. And thinking about all of that, then the FISO framework actually for us was really good in terms of referencing up some of the work that we're actually engaged in. So in 2015, there were three major pieces of work that was actually happening at Ringwood Secondary College. First of those was new pedagogies for deep learning. And it had been a process of working with staff to educate them as to some of the key principles and concepts and how we might actually change the way we actually worked in terms of the teacher-student relationship, because that was a big part of it, and I'll talk about that in a little bit more detail in a moment. The second part that sort of fitted in was the fact that we were part of a teaching academy for professional practice, where we're actually looking at how we were providing for beginning teachers in terms of their training and their ability to successfully tackle the transition from a university-based program into a real live school situation. And there's been some really promising work that's continued out of that. And the third area was a focus that we had on positive psychology with a partnership that we engaged in with the University of Melbourne and the City of Maroondah, who have also embraced that concept as well. And so that was a nice lead-in around some of the wellbeing stuff and one of the points that was mentioned at the end of the last talk. So for us, that meant that we were able to align that work with our new strategic plan, because we did a school review in 2015. So the main areas that sort of came out of that for us, without going into all the detail, was particularly around student achievement, which focused on learning growth, the notion of student cognitive engagement, and in particular increasing the level of student agency around their learning, because our students were pretty good receptors of the learning that teachers provided for them, and we were looking at new ways of dealing with that, and new pedagogies actually gave us another lens into that work. And the third area, of course, was around wellbeing. And we have instituted what's called a wellbeing profiler across the school that has enabled us to benchmark where all our students are at and to think about the programs that we're going to offer in that space. So that's the context around which we're doing this work. I've got 10 minutes, so there's so much that's sort of happening, and there's so much energy and vibrancy around a lot of the work. But I thought I might start off with something that's a bit bigger than one school. And that's an area that's sort of focusing on a community of practice around the concept of teaching and learning excellence, and in particular, the idea of learning growth. And the model that we've actually used to think about the work that we're going to engage in is, in fact, the NPDL work. So at the start of our conversations as a group of local schools, we actually said we need to improve learning growth, but we need to identify what it is that we actually wanted to start with. And so we've had the pleasure, if you like, of working with Simon Breakspear now for a couple of years through some of our local network conferences. And Simon's pretty big around agile innovation. And he's been really good in helping us to think about taking those big ideas around learning growth and turning them into something that is manageable in terms of producing change. So going from that mountaintop concept to actually actioning it within a classroom environment. So what happened out of our collaboration as a group of schools is that we were able to look at this idea of learning growth, bring it down to an area that we might want to focus on. So in the case of our local group of schools, we're focusing on numeracy. And then within each school, there was a particular target group of students that we looked at. In my school, it's Year 8. And in Term 3, 2016, we are looking at the topic of linear and non-linear relationships and how we might actually improve student learning growth in that space. So what we actually did is come up with the idea that around pre-testing as being the starting point, so knowing where the kids are at. And we actually have used the concept of pre-testing right across the group of schools that we're part of. We wanted to then based on the information we collected, identify resources that we could actually target to students at their point of learning need. And so what happened in this space is that the pre-service teachers that were part of our Teacher Academy initiative actually came together with our teacher teams to actually look at what resources might be needed to help those students. And their task was involved to actually gather those resources, curate them and make them available back to the teachers in the classroom to use. And what's been really exciting about that is that now we are building a repository of resources that can be used across a whole group of schools, targeting levels 3 through to level 9 on any particular topic or area of study within numeracy. Now, it's early days yet, but the next part of the work's the really exciting bit is that now, given that we've got these resources, how can we then extend the learning so that students can dig deeper beyond that surface level, where obviously they need that learning to help them go further, to go deeper. And we're really confident this model is really going to help us. Now, there's a link that's shown on the screen which actually you could go to actually see the work that's happening across that group of schools, and there's a whole lot more theoretical underpinning of that. But that's a community of practice that's consistent with the FISO model that we've established through another piece of work that we've actually been involved in. An exciting bit around this is that the potential in the next 18 months to 2 years that the resources that are produced out of this project can be made available to anyone, anywhere in the world. And what we've tried to do at Ringwood is to embed that work in with some other curriculum planning that we've done in iTunes U, where a lot of our courses in Year 7 and 8 are actually published there. So anyone in this room or anywhere in the state can actually go and get hold of that material as well. So that's one project that relates to a community of practice. That's the Ringwood Alliance within the Deakin Teaching Academy of Professional Practice. There's a whole website there that's available for anyone to look at. Have a look at the link down the bottom there and you can explore that further. The second thing that I wanted to mention today around our work with FISO is it's provided us with a real opportunity to align and build practice excellence. So the deep learning and the NPDL is an integral part of our work in our PDPs at the school. Now, the screen shot is very dense and you're not going to be able to read it, but I have given you all a handout which actually describes this work in a lot more detail. So one of the requirements that we have of the teaching staff at Ringwood Secondary College is that as part of their work in looking at the domains of teaching, the 8 SIL standards, they have a whole range of things that they can think about using to demonstrate their practice, to demonstrate their professional knowledge that actually builds on the principles of NPDL. And there's a lot of choice that we've actually provided to teachers in that process based on the work that we've been undertaking over the last 18 months. The other bit that's really interesting is how we've actually aligned it with our school strategic plan and the various high-level strategies that are part of that. There is a key on the second page which explains what all of those symbols actually mean. In 10 minutes, I'm not going to have a chance to really unpack that, but it is easy to follow. And in your school communities, it's pretty easy to substitute your own work into this sort of framework. And it's a usable and user-friendly document. And you might want to think about, well, how could I perhaps embed some of our work into the performance and development culture of the school? The other thing that's sort of happened for us in terms of thinking about all of this work has been the leadership roles that we've actually established in the school. So at the moment, we have 11 leading teacher jobs that are up, and we've created a number of new roles that align with our work over the next 3 years. So one of the teaching and leader roles particularly focuses on pedagogy and cognitive engagement. All right, and that's a direct link into a lead role for the work around NPDL, for example. And there are other roles that to do with student connection, student agency around house leadership, all of those sorts of things. So I think in terms of thinking about planning cycles and those sorts of things, we get an opportunity probably once every 3 to 5 years to think about how we might realign our work in conjunction with what the bigger picture actually is as well. And so we've taken this time in our cycle to do a fair bit of that work. And the final area that I'd like to talk about today, and I've mentioned it a little bit here this afternoon, and that's the notion of student voice, choice and agency. One of the things that we've had the opportunity to do this year and start a lot more work in this space is to be able to work with 14 other schools across the state, as well as the NPDL schools, in a partnership with VASP, the Mitchell Institute, and being mentored by Yong Zhao. And one of the really interesting parts of this work is that we are trying to create, as much as we can, ways in which students are able to produce products or services that are useful to someone else. And that wouldn't matter whether it's in a curriculum-based initiative or whether it's as part of co-curricular programs. You know, it covers, I guess, the full range of schooling. And what's been really interesting for us in our pastoral care program, for example, in the last term, we've allowed students to come up with their own project that they're going to implement in a 6 or 7 week period. And it's not going to be assessed, but we do have a rubric for it where the students can self-assess themselves against the 6 C's in the NPDL. And it's about creating this idea of gratitude, ability to be doing something useful for somebody else that sort of frames some of the thinking around that. And that's pretty exciting. The other part of this is that out of this group of schools, there's also been a creative team set up, and IF on the end, as opposed to IVE. And they're actually capturing the journey of the work amongst all these schools. So over the next 12 months, we're going to have something that's produced by those young people across a range of schools that is actually going to, I guess, map out a bit of a blueprint for the type of schooling they would like to see more mainstream in the future as well. So all of that's pretty exciting work. There's a lot of energy going into the thinking around the work. And what's important, I think, in all of this is that we're on a journey. There's not really a beginning or an end point. You know, you get to a destination along the way and then you step off again into something else. But what's been really exciting for us is that there's been a level of work that we've started and we've been able to link really well into the framework that we now have as part of our education environment. And it's, I guess in terms of my time as a principal, the times that have worked best for us as a school and in education is where we've had a bit of a blueprint that steps out where we're going and that everybody understands what that is and it doesn't change from day to day. It's actually, the thing that we keep coming back to whenever we have some questions about what might we do next, which part of that space might we start to play in a bit more. So that's the exciting part. It's never been a better time to be in education. Because at the end of the day, it's about creating the future life opportunities for the young people with whom we work. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Michael. So we're talking about new pedagogies for deep learning, and one of the things I heard Michael say that I wanted to come back and emphasise was he used the phrase actually actioning change. And I think that's something we really need to think about. How do we actually action change? I think that something that's been consistent across all of our panellists and a way that we can actually action change is through our communities of practice, which is the way we work together in our schools and early childhood centres and services on actually actioning change coming out of the FISO initiatives. So thank you very much, Michael. We're going to move now to our panel discussion. So I'm going to move over here. And hopefully the camera picks us all up. How are we going up there? I'm just going to assume we're all working okay, unless I see a wave from the back. Here we are. Great. So our panel discussion today, I'm going to start us off with a couple of questions, but if you have a question from the audience, what you can do is in front of you there is a button on your microphone. You can press it and that'll place you in a queue, and if we get time, we'll get to all of those questions. I thought I would start off by throwing the first question to Teresa, if you don't mind. The first question I'd like to ask is around what advice you would give to a new teacher starting in your school about how they can actually action change through their work.
One of the things that we really look for when we're working with people or people coming in new to our school is not necessarily what they know, but how well they can work with others and to be open to change. And at any age, we can shut down and not take a risk to learn from others or be open to the feedback that they give us. So to action change, you actually need to take a risk, leap off the cliff and see what happens. And I think that's our job, is to jump off with them, be there at the bottom to help support, but also just to encourage that there is no wrong way. It's just what can we learn from here.
Thanks very much. And my next question is going to be posed to Lynn, which is, in your experience of working with schools across Victoria and beyond, what's the thing that really makes the biggest difference on students' learning gain?
It's when people actually know their students and they know what to teach and they know what to scaffold for those students, but also when they're true to themselves about what they know about learning and what they know as learners, and they bring those pedagogical practices into play to support the students to grow as learners.
Thanks very much. One of the key things I heard you say there, Lynn, was about our teachers knowing what they need to know about learning. And I suppose that's a question I'd like to pose to maybe Nicole. What do you think are the things that teachers really need to know to be the types of leaders and educators we want them to be?
I think it's really important to know different ways of learning. There's not one true way of learning. There's not one true way of assessment, and it's to develop different ideas within your classroom, to trial new ideas and see what works. What works for one cohort of children may not actually work for another cohort of children as well. So what you do one year may in fact be completely different for the next year. And what works for one child may not work for another child. So it's really, as Lynn said, getting to know your students and getting to know their different ways of learning, developing different ideas with each child. Just going back to those rubrics, I mean, they've been really powerful. So I suppose taking those opportunities to go beyond the pencil and paper test and develop different ways of assessment, having children involved in their learning, having those conversations with the children about what they need to know and what they want to know.
Alex, I might pose the sort of same question phrased slightly differently to you as well. If you had a new teacher coming into your school, what would you want them to be able to demonstrate that they could really do as a practitioner, and what would be the most important thing you'd want to see them exhibiting?
I've actually been working on this with my student teacher this year, is having an idea of where you want the children to go and developing those questioning techniques. So being able to ask questions that will really probe and get the children thinking in a way that will help them to co-plan with you what you want to do. So asking the right questions, getting them thinking, okay, what would we need to learn to do that? What can we do next? And knowing when to ask the right questions. That's actually something that we've been working on together this year. It's really important.
Michael, a question for you. Something that I took from your presentation was about the development of communities of practice, and you also spoke about some pretty rich and engaged networks that you have with other schools, with your local government area and beyond. I wonder if you can talk to us some more about the importance of communities of practice and networks in terms of positioning ourselves within the system.
It's really interesting work, because one of the things by coming together, you actually realise that you're able to make change at a much more systemic level. So for example, the conversation that's arisen out of the Maroondah network of principals is that we've got similar issues that we're actually trying to solve, and realise that there's a broad range of expertise that can actually assist in coming up with solutions. And we've actually discovered a number of experts within the group that actually can help with some of that work. So I think that's really valuable. The other thing you can do as a community of practice is that you can actually influence changes in the broader community too. So, for example, some of our work in the wellbeing space, we've actually influenced the local council to think about the types of programs that they provide for young people based on the data that they've collected about the health and wellbeing of young people throughout the municipality in all our schools. So that's been something that we didn't necessarily plan to do at the start. So you get some surprising stuff that actually happens. I think the important part about the network stuff is that, you know, there's got to be something in it for you as well, you know, because otherwise, you know, the work of schools and the work of leaders in schools is pretty busy. And so there has to be a value proposition around doing that work. And I guess the value proposition for me in most of this is that it can make a difference to the outcomes, educational or wellbeing or whatever it might be for those young people. So that's I guess that's the higher level motivation for doing the work as well.
Thanks. I'm going to ask a follow-up question as well. My follow-up question is about the mechanisms you can imagine for teachers and schools to feed forward and to feed up their experience and their wisdom from practice into the policy-making realm.
Yeah, I guess this has been the most problematic space in education. In my time as a principal, being able to scale things up has always been the difficult part of the exercise, because from a systemic point of view, it's often difficult to take local contexts and say, well, that's going to apply everywhere. So I think the work that we're currently doing with NPDL actually gives us some really good opportunity, because what you've got all this brilliant work that's happening locally, and we've seen some great examples of that this afternoon, and that's being shared across a fairly large group of schools. But at the same time, we have, I guess, a framework which has been driven from the system point of view that actually helps schools to frame their thinking. So I think it's a bit of both. It's not just, you know, pushing it up from below. It's also having the support and the structures that enable the work to be shared effectively as well.
Thanks very much. I've been given the signal that we've got 5 minutes. I do want to encourage you in the audience, if you have a question, to press the button and we'll come to you. Lynn, I thought I might throw the next question to you if you can come a bit closer to the microphone as well. The question is, what do you see as the power of, or the opportunities presented by collaboration?
I think the power from collaboration is that you can have evidence of practice that works being shared and people being motivated and urged on by each other's good news stories. And I think that when that collaboration involves students, it has more power, because the students give extra drive and extra oomph to things, and the students can actually be the ones that can influence changing practice in other teachers' classrooms, because other teachers want to know what's happening and why are those kids so engaged, and then that brings the parents on board too.
Thanks. I can see we've got one question up there in the audience. Hopefully, if you... Yep, have a go.
Just for Alex and Nicole, just wondering, congratulations, great job. It's great to see good teachers out there. I guess one of the things that we are challenged with in our school is getting people on board with change, and obviously there must have been some resistance, and obviously you two are doing a great job. How's that been at your school, and what sort of percentage are you working at the moment as far as having people on the same train?
that's been probably our biggest problem within our school, is getting everyone on board. For this project to happen, we started through leadership. So we brought it on through leadership, and we actually asked all the level leaders to work with us on this, and then to take it back to their levels. So it's sort of we approached leadership. We brought the books. We gave ideas. We had all the resources there really, and all the level leaders had to do was take it back to their level. And then I think slowly people came on board. They thought it was just going to be just one day, and we kind of tricked them because they realised it wasn't just one day, that it was going to be a bit more than that. But I think there was a bit of negativity at first, but I think as also Lynn was saying, the students became engaged in it and they wanted to do more, and I think slowly the students actually drove the learning for the teachers, and this is how it developed within our school for this unit, because they became engaged in it and the wheels started to turn. Did you want to add?
Just to say, the parent feedback was pretty incredible, and whenever we had that verbally, we sort of were saying, let leadership know. We had one parent who just, she wrote a big lengthy letter thanking us for, the unit and something so engaging, and especially regarding the market. She had a child involved in the collaborative market in running that, and she was just blown away by how excited her child was about what was going on at school. So get that, that's just one of the things, is getting that positive feedback can influence, and I think our leadership team has seen that it's been received really well, and that there is an expectation that there'll be more things to come like this. Next year we need to have a big whole school unit, and we need to do something else that's really big and deep. Yeah.
Just a reminder, if there's any questions from video conference sites as well, please feel free to unmute your microphone and ask a question.
I can see.
Just
question.
taking the next step probably towards Michael on that same question, is obviously in a secondary school, a lot of teachers teaching textbooks and things like that. How did you get them to change?
Well, the first thing, there wasn't a choice. It's not about invitational models in some respects. But what's important in that is that you actually create the time and provide the resources for people to do the work. So one of your jobs as a leader of a school is to be quite innovative and inventive around how you might think about that. So it might be around freeing up meeting time to enable people to work together in teams. It might be about CRT release time. It might be about providing opportunities for a team of 4 or 5 people to do an extended course together. All of those things are the other thing for us too, using technology fairly broadly, is creating sandpit time where people can just play in the space. Adults are like children, that they like to play with things to get an idea of what might be possible too. So I don't think there's just one way, but for me, we're talking generally, with work like this, we're usually talking about cultural change. So with cultural change, it's around time and resources and holding the line when things get tough. So we don't want to just always revert back to past practice. And sometimes in education, that's what happens because, what are we going to do next? And that degree of uncertainty. So you need your leaders to keep supporting the work as you move forward.
Thanks, Michael. Now, to wind us up for our presentations today and for our panel discussion, I'm going to pose a question to each of the panellists, or a challenge to them, which is to, in one sentence, might be a bit of a challenge, but I'm sure you'll do your best. In one sentence, can you describe for us the power of student agency? So I might start with you, Lynn, and we'll start at the other end of the panel. What's the real power of student agency?
Kids wanting to learn and wanting to learn more.
I guess for me, it's young people taking responsibility for their own learning and being able to make a difference to both their current and future communities?
I think it's students being able to think for themselves and know how to learn, because learning is their job.
For me as a teacher, it inspires me to be a better teacher, to teach and to actually listen to my students.
I think student agency gives us that picture that these are the leaders that are coming up behind us, and we're doing our work now with them. And when they have real context and real life work and opinions and can show that, they inspire everyone around them, and it makes the energy in the workplace and in the community just grows.
Thank you. So it falls now to me to thank our panellists. Lynn, Davie, thank you very much. Teresa Stone, Nicole Barnes, Alex Box, Michael Phillips. And I'd also like to thank again our IT and AV support, the Bastow Institute, the Teaching and Learning branch of the Department of Education and Training, and the Regional Services Group for all of their work. Thank you all for tuning in from as far away as Camperdown and Portland. Portland, you had some wonderful cakes there. I saw them at the beginning and they're all gone now. Thank you all for being here in the audience as well, and have a great night. Thank you.